Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a true, absolutely bone-chilling incident that turned a supposedly relaxing road trip into a literal psychological nightmare. I mean, this isn't just your standard campfire ghost story. It's a completely unsolved puzzle that really challenges the boundaries of both science and the human mind. So grab a seat, get comfortable, or maybe leave the lights on to this one, and let's dive right in to decode the mystery behind Manali 28 kilometers.
Shanda hai tu, mera suraj hai tu. You are my moon, you are my sun. We've all probably heard or fallen asleep to innocent little lullabies just like this one, right? But for a 25-year-old guy named Sahil, this exact song is now a trigger for pure, unadulterated terror. It doesn't bring peace anymore, it brings absolute dread. So how exactly does a sweet childhood melody become someone's most terrifying recurring nightmare? Well, to figure that out, we have to go back to the beginning.
Part 1. A trip to heal.
To really understand the horror of this story, we've got to look at why these guys were there in the first place. Four friends, Sahil, Chirag, Arun, and Samay, went on a mountain getaway to Manali. But listen, this wasn't some fun weekend party trip. It was basically an intervention for Samay. Just a few months prior, Samay's little brother was tragically killed in a horrific car crash during a school trip. Samay, who was usually the life of the party, the guy everyone wanted to be around, had just gone completely silent. He was drowning in severe depression. The whole goal here was to pull him out of this incredibly dark place. And keep this in mind, because this unresolved grief, it's the absolutely crucial psychological anchor for everything that happens next. Part 2. The Valley of Death.
So the first few days in Manali were pretty normal. But on day 3, things took a really sharp turn when they decided to drive up to the beautiful Rohtang Pass. On their way out, their hotel receptionist stopped them and gave them a stark, very specific warning. Make sure you return before 6 p.m. Why? Because the literal translation of Rohtang is a pile of corpses, or the Valley of Death. The receptionist actually explained that even the locals lock their doors from the inside by 6 p.m. Legend has it that a phantom roams the valley, and for centuries, travelers caught out at night have been found dead by morning. Deaths that the authorities just conveniently write off as accidents or hypothermia.
Part 3. The Mystery of 28 Kilometers. Now, like a lot of city tourists, the boys kind of just laughed off the warning. They thought, oh, it's just local superstition. They went trekking, had a good time, and by the time they finally decided to head back, it was already 9:15 p.m. The other tourists were long gone, pitch darkness had completely fallen, and this incredibly thick fog was rapidly rolling in. They're driving at barely 30 kilometers per hour, just crawling along, when the first anomaly appears out of the mist. A roadside milestone that read Manali 28 kilometers. But sitting right beside it in the freezing cold was a bizarre sight. It was a man wearing nothing but a thin, white dhoti. Sahil noticed him, felt a massive chill go down his spine, but decided to just keep quiet.
20 minutes later, they're still navigating through this dense fog, and the exact same milestone appears again, Manali 28 kilometers. They were stuck in a loop. But the loop wasn't actually the terrifying part. It was what they saw. Sahil finally spoke up, pointing out that the man in the white dhoti was still sitting there. But Chirag immediately interrupted him, saying, "What man? There's no man. That's a little girl holding a toy." Then Arun, who is white-knuckling the steering wheel at this point, yells that they're both crazy. He saw a massive black horse standing there, staring right at them. Let that sink in. 3 friends, looking at the exact same spot at the exact same time, seeing 3 completely different, impossible things.
Amidst this impossible, terrifying loop, it was actually Samay's reaction that was the most disturbing. He just went completely numb. He was staring out into the dark, repeating over and over again in this hollow voice, "Someone needs our help. If someone asks for help, we should stop." This right here is where the grief was doing its heavy lifting. The unresolved, crushing pain of losing his little brother made Samay so empathetic and so psychologically vulnerable that he was unwittingly turning into an open door for whatever supernatural force was out there hiding in the dark. Part 4. The Unwanted Passenger. By 11 p.m., they were still trapped. The 28-kilometer milestone appeared for a third time, but this time it was completely empty. No man, no little girl, no horse. They actually thought for a second maybe the nightmare was over, but they were wrong. The horror had simply moved from the side of the road directly to their car. Arun yelled at everyone not to look out the windows. Why? Because right outside, a 15-year-old boy covered in mud with severe facial injuries was keeping perfect pace with them. They were driving at 40 kilometers per hour, but the boy wasn't running. He was just walking, effortlessly, right beside their moving vehicle.
Then, the absolute unthinkable happened. Samay muttered, "Maybe he needs help." and reached for the window controls. Arun frantically slammed the central locking system to stop him, but it completely failed. It just didn't work. The window rolled down, and the freezing mountain air rushed into the car. Samay was physically connecting with this entity. When Arun finally managed to gun the engine and speed up to leave the figure behind, Sahil looked back in the rearview mirror. The boy was standing in the middle of the road, waving. And Samay? Samay was smiling and waving right back at him. Suddenly, like breaking through a wall, the loop broke. A 16-kilometer milestone appeared, and by 2 a.m., they miraculously reached the safety of their hotel.
Part 5. The Midnight Lullaby.
Safely locked inside their hotel room, they thought they had finally left the mountain's phantom far behind them. They crashed out and went to sleep. But at 3:30 in the morning, Sahil's eyes snapped open. He heard a voice. It was Samay. He was standing dead center in front of the mirror, singing a lullaby to his own reflection like a small child. Chanda hai tu, merai suraj hai tu. The visual was absolutely bone-chilling. Samay's eyes were blood red, and even more horrifying, they were deep, visible choke marks completely surrounding his neck. The entity wasn't left on the mountain, guys. It was right there in the room with them.
The room was frozen in terror. Nobody dared to even take a step toward him. Slowly, the possessed Samay turned around to face them. With a deeply unsettling smile and a voice that sounded frighteningly childish, he asked, "If I knock on your window at night, will you open it to help me?" Literally, right after those words left his mouth, his eyes rolled back into his head and he collapsed, completely unconscious, onto the floor.
Part 6. Grief and the Supernatural. The next morning, terrified and totally desperate, the friends remembered the receptionist warning and rushed an unconscious Samay to a local pundit. And this is where we get a brilliant but truly terrifying diagnosis. The pundit immediately knew, without anyone telling him, that Samay had recently lost a young loved one. He explained that the entity on the mountain had purposefully taken the form of a badly injured young boy. Why? To perfectly mimic the tragic car crash of Samay's little brother. The entity weaponized that overwhelming grief, using it as a master key to bypass Samay's psychological defenses and enter his mind. In supernatural terms, it's a phenomenon known as possession by proxy.
The pundit didn't waste any time. He immediately initiated a really intense process. First came that diagnosis, which was quickly followed by an aggressive exorcism ritual, something commonly known locally as Nizar and Jadfuk. The climax of this ritual was incredibly visceral and honestly, super disturbing. The chanting in the room reached a fever pitch, and Samay began to violently heave. Finally, he purged this thick, bizarre black liquid from his mouth. According to the pundit, that was the physical manifestation that the dark entity had literally been forced out of his body.
When you take a step back and actually map out the timeline of this terror, you realize something huge. This wasn't just random bad luck. From the descent into the thick fog at 9:15 p.m. to the psychological probing at the looping milestone at 11 p.m., they thought they escaped at 2 a.m., but then, exactly when their guard was completely down, fast asleep at 3:30 a.m., the possession reached its peak. This wasn't a standard run-of-the-mill haunting. It was a methodical, highly targeted attack, perfectly paced to break down a vulnerable psyche throughout the night.
Now Samay is doing much better today, but Sahil? He says he still wakes up in cold sweats to the echo of that lullaby. Ultimately, this terrifying story leaves us confronting a really haunting psychological reality. It forces us to step back and ask, are our darkest moments of grief just an emotion? Or are they literally an open door for unseen forces waiting out there in the dark? Do our most vulnerable moments actually become our greatest enemies? Take a moment to really think about that. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. It's been a wild ride. Until next time, stay safe out there and definitely stay vigilant.